In exploring board games, for me, and I think for many of us, this idea of the narrative is important. The components, the rules, the story that it tells, the challenges to resolve, the glory on the tabletop, pulling you in, this idea of stepping outside of space and time into this alternate universe, into this construct, and making some tactical decisions, having some fun, rolling some dice, seeing a story unfold real time, but at your own pace, enjoying the game at your own pace. And if I had to divide up the two games, and I know there's a little bit of crossover, this idea of a miniature-based game where the delivery system is primarily miniature-based, and for this vlog, we're going to look at Zombicide Invader, one of my favorite games, a fairly new acquisition, having a blast playing it. There's cards to spawn the invaders, and there's cards for equipment, but the juice of the game is primarily delivered through lots and lots and lots of miniatures. And then we've got Seventh Continent. I'm not going to give any away spoilers. I'm making my way through the first quest, really enjoying myself. The pace, though, where Seventh Continent is entirely card-based. You've got some tokens, you've got a couple of miniatures, but they're more of map markers and point markers of where you are. The narrative is delivered through cards. The difference between the two. I find with card-based board games, or what do we call them, a card game? Card-based board games, they tend to be a lot bigger in terms of expanse. They tend to have a lot more options. They tend to be able to branch out and cover a vast amount of territory, whether that's in exploration, whether that's through narrative, whether that's through a number of enemies to fight, simply because producing cards is much easier than producing miniatures. And cards can be expensive depending on the finish and depending on the thickness, or they can cost less depending on the thickness. But certainly to produce hundreds and hundreds of cards, like we see in Seventh Continent, does cost less than the miniatures. So card-based games, I find, tend to play out at a much slower pace. And part of it is physically selecting the cards, setting them out, laying them out, picking the right cards, shuffling the right cards. I mean, yes, there's a little bit more setup involved, but I find that card-based games are a little bit more relaxing, a little bit more discovery. And that's not to say there aren't tense moments or moments where you really have a lot of action. But in terms of Seventh Continent, watching it unfold on the table, you kind of have a decision tree unfolding. You see all the cards. You leave the cards you've already played in terms of exploration and equipment in the pile. And sometimes I like to just step back. Yes, tactically think, okay, what's the next step? But sometimes it's neat to kind of tactically take a step back and just look at how the story has unfolded. It's almost like card-based games give you a storyboard along the way. Now, miniature-based games, I mean, Wargamer Fritz, miniatures. I love miniature games. Zombicide Invader and miniature-heavy games, the visuals kind of pull you down. I guess Seventh Continent, I feel, pulls you away, where you want this big picture. Miniature-based games pull you into that moment, and you're surrounded by tons and tons of miniatures. The action plays much quicker, much faster. But that history, it's almost like an action movie. That history isn't there. You blow off a lot of invaders, you kill off a lot of zombies, more spawn, things are moving, you run, you gun, you grab gear. It's a lot more action-packed. So I find the pace of miniature games to be much, much quicker, much, much faster. And likewise, play much quicker, play a lot faster based on the components on the table. So the two flavors of the both of them really kind of depends on what am I feeling in the moment. You know, when I make that decision, and of course, again, polarizing this into card-based games versus miniature-based games, I have a lot of titles that I enjoy on both sides. Part of it, of course, is when I'm selecting a game to play, what do I feel like? Am I doing a dungeon crawler thing? Am I doing like a shooter thing? Are we going to do some sort of historical narrative? And then within that subset, it's kind of like, do I want a much slower pace? is this a game I have a few hours to play? Or if I'm setting it up on the gaming table, is this a game that I'll leave out? I'll play for a few hours. I'll come back maybe the next day, play a little bit more, come back. It's the title's going to be out for a while. So if I'm going to have the title out for a while, then let's play a game that has that slower pace. If it's something I'm feeling like, 2 or 3 hours, I should be doing something else, but I want to play some board games, then I tend to go miniature heavy. I tend to want to explore the mini-based games. So looking at the titles in your collection, looking at your acquisitions, or being part of a gaming group, a gaming club, last time you played based on the titles that people bring, do you feel that there is a pace? Do you feel there's a difference between card games and board games? And how do you feel that pace, that narrative shuffles between the two?